Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. I believe, Sap, this is our official first show of the postseason. We did a little play-in, but that doesn't count for me. When the postseason is the first round of the playoffs, and we are here. There have been every series has already had at least one game. Several series have had two games. And we've seen some blowouts. We've seen some incredibly competitive games. But, Sap, let's start right here in Boston, where we both are, where it seems to be the most competitive series, the most watched series. In fact, the numbers for the game one on Sunday were, I believe, the most watched playoff round one series in like 5 or 6 years. And that's the Nets and the Celtics. Tons to talk about there. So we'll start off with talking Boston stuff, and then we're going to move on and talk about the rest of the series. Before we get into the actual Celtics Nets series, though, yesterday it was announced that Marcus Smart, the Celtics point guard, won the Defensive Player of the Year, becoming the first guard to do that since Gary Payton. And Gary Payton was on hand to give Marcus Smart the award at the Celtics practice facility. Really cool moment. All of his team surprised him. And Gary Payton gave him the award. We talked about the award, Sap, last week. I had Marcus Smart as my Defensive Player of the Year. You had him as one of the finalists, and you picked Bridges, who finished second, I believe, in voting. And so what were your thoughts on the whole thing with Gary Payton and Marcus Smart being awarded Defensive Player of the Year?
Really cool moment having Gary Payton there, who played defense at as high a level as Marcus Smart, if not higher. I mean, he's one of the greatest defensive guards ever, and also was an outstanding offensive player. I mean, 9-time All-NBA, 9-time All-Defensive NBA, MVP candidate, Hall of Famer. You know, I think one of the 50 greatest players in the history of the sport. I'm sure that Marcus Smart kind of idolized Gary Payton because he was a really tough, hard-nosed player without question. And I think Marcus Smart deserved it. I mean, I would have voted for Mikal Bridges, but I thought Marcus Smart, Rob Williams, Giannis, I always put into the equation, Bam Adebayo. You know, you kind of look to the teams that are successful, that have good defensive units, and you kind of pick from there. And, you know, the thing is about Marcus Smart, and it's interesting because one of my nephews, who's actually 48, so, you know, that's how old I am. I have a 48-year-old nephew who's a huge Celtics fan and a big Marcus Smart fan. And, you know, he always kind of pushes back and says, you don't really like Marcus Smart. I said, well, in the last 3 months, my opinion of Marcus Smart has changed because his game has evolved. Right. I mean, I think, and we've talked about this for the last 3 months, Jet, the way he played the final 3 months of the season, to me, is the biggest reason the Celtics turned this thing around, going 33-10 over the second half of the season, essentially the best record in basketball along with Phoenix, because he had been out in early January with COVID and some other concerns, came back. He changed his approach. He became a point guard. He was a facilitator, not looking to score as much, making sure that Tatum and Brown get theirs, and also playing great defense. The player I compared him to, and again, I'm old, so I'm going to bring up someone from the 80s, early 90s, Maurice Cheeks, who's in the Hall of Fame. Great defensive point guard, excellent facilitator. When the 76ers needed him, he could score. That's what Marcus Smart became the last 3 months of the regular season, and that's the biggest reason the Celtics turned this thing around. So my opinion on him has changed. If he continues to do what he's done the last 3 months, the ceiling's very high for Marcus Smart and also the Boston Celtics. And you can go back to the final play of Sunday's win over Brooklyn. Marcus Smart made a great pass to Jason Tatum, who had an outstanding catch, spin move a la Kobe Bryant for the game-winning shot. And it was Marcus Smart who split the double team and made that extra pass. And that's what the Celtics have done the last 3 months, led by Marcus Smart. And that's why on the offensive end, they've been more efficient. So, again, Smart, for his first 7+ years, I always kind of pushed back because I always thought that he thought his opinion of himself was a little too high. But I think something happened in January. He looked in the mirror and said, I'm going to be a point guard a la Maurice Cheeks or Dennis Johnson or whoever, you know, a really good defensive point guard who can score but also facilitates. And I think that's the biggest reason for the turnaround. So congratulations to, I know, your favorite Celtics player. I think he deserved it. I was very happy for him.
Yeah, you know, that play, Sap, at the end of the game winner. And we're going to, again, talk more about that game and preview the rest of the Brooklyn and Celtics series. That, I think, was the perfect microcosm, Sap, of how Marcus Smart has changed, because, and I think everybody said this, you know, this isn't breaking new ground, but that's a shot, that 3-pointer, a little bit of a contested 3-pointer, is a decent enough look. the first half of the year and throughout his career up until the last 3 months, he takes that shot 10 times out of 10 and he probably misses it. And then they lose that game. And instead he said, I can probably find a better look for a better score. And he decided to pull it down, one dribble in, find Jason Tatum. And that was the difference in the game. And it was such a fantastic game winner because it really showed the evolution of the Celtics this season and the turnaround. And from not just Marcus Smart, but the three guys who touched the ball were their three most important players. Brown started with the ball, then Smart, then Tatum. Each of those guys played their role to the evolved point that they are now perfectly. Brown probably forces something earlier in the season. Instead, he hit a little bit of a wall with Goran Dragic, decided, I'm not going to try to force up a crappy shot here. Found Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart, like I just said, same thing. I could take this shot, but I'm going to try to find something better. Takes a dribble in, finds Jason Tatum, and the Celtics win the game. I mean, it couldn't have been a more perfect example of how the Celtics have changed from the beginning of the season to the end of the season in one play, and it happened to be a game winner. It's almost like you couldn't script it any better, Sap. So, yeah, I'm glad that your opinion of Marcus Smart has changed. And I got to be honest with you, Sap, when we were talking about the Celtics earlier in the season, and I think I said this, in this show, and I certainly said it in some of the post games I did too. Though I love Marcus Smart, I was ready to move on from him. I thought, okay, this isn't working. They can't keep going this way. They need to find somebody who's more willing to be a point guard. They need to find somebody that meshes better with Tatum and Brown. And Smart, to his immense credit and to Ime Udoka's immense credit, completely has changed, and changed, I think, a lot of people's opinion on him. And we always knew he could play defense, but now it seems to be more of his main focus, along with distributing the basketball. And it's resulted in such a massive change for the Celtics. And Sep, I remember a couple of years ago, maybe it was when we were at the Herald, maybe it was more recently, a similar thing happened with you and Chris Paul, where your opinion changed of Chris Paul based on how he adjusted to a new role.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, you have.
I'm not saying Marcus Smart's Chris Paul, so
Chris Paul's a different level, but no, it's a great point, Jeff, because you watch a player, you see how they evolve, and then you can change your opinions. There's nothing wrong with changing your opinions, your takes on players, because they change. And I give Marcus Smart all the credit in the world for changing. Chris Paul, too, now on his fifth team. Now I look back and say, Chris Paul, every team he goes to gets a lot better when he gets there and then gets a lot worse when he leaves. It happened in New Orleans. It happened with the Clippers. It happened in Houston. It happened in Oklahoma City. And certainly so far has happened in Phoenix, where they had the best record in the league. So you have to let these players breathe a little bit, even if it's late in their career. Conversely, Russell Westbrook, who's someone who's the least self-aware athlete I think I've ever seen, who just doesn't get it. He's a guy who's going to go to the Hall of Fame, top 75 player, but just doesn't understand that, something was needed differently from him this year for the Lakers to succeed. I thought when Westbrook was acquired by the Lakers that he would have been the perfect sixth man. Let him lead your second unit, be the high energy guy. Look at the Golden State Warriors, right? Steph Curry gets injured the final month of the regular season, comes back to the playoffs and says, I'll come off the bench.
Right.
Let the backcourt that we have right now, Klay Thompson, Jordan Poole, let them go ahead and play. I'll come off the bench. That's called being a leader, being self-aware. I'm going to go in the Wayback Machine once again, Jet, since I'm the old guy on the show.
Go for it.
Larry Bird in his third year, 1981-82, had his eye socket fractured by an elbow from Harvey Catchings of the Milwaukee Bucks. He missed quite a few games. At that point, Robert Parrish played like an MVP candidate. McHale was growing as a player. Maxwell was still outstanding. That when Bird came back, he came off the bench. Larry Bird, who was at worst the second or third best player in the entire NBA, said, I'll come off the bench. Let McHale, Parrish, and Maxwell continue to start. They're doing a great job. I'll come off the bench. I'm confident in my ability, self-aware enough to know that it's all about the team. Steph Curry's done the same thing in Golden State. Can you imagine having a conversation with Russell Westbrook and saying, hey, Russ, what's going to really help the team is if you can be the sixth man, come off the bench midway through the first quarter, maybe you replace LeBron after LeBron starts the game and you lead our second unit. There would be punches thrown. Russell Westbrook would push back against that.
They couldn't even convince him to set picks.
Right.
So
that's being self-aware. And this is why I give Marcus Smart all the credit in the world. He just finally said, you know what? he's the best passer on the team. I don't think we doubt that, right? And they've got a pretty good team because Tatum's a good passer, Horford, Rob Williams, these guys are all good passers. Jaylen Brown, not so much, but trying to get better.
No, but that's okay. You can't have everybody be a great passer.
Have everything. I mean, Jaylen Brown, gets as many turnovers as assists in a game. That's not good. But Marcus Smart's the best passer on that team. So excellent defender, top flight defender, now defensive player of the year. Congratulations. First guard in 25 years to win that award. Thank God we finally got one. Because as you've said many times, the league's changed. Perimeter defense is bigger than rim protection. So let's give it to a guard who covers guys on the perimeter. But, Marcus Smart's evolved as a player, and he realized I'm a great defender, outstanding facilitator. I can still score. I don't have to chuck up threes. I can drive to the basket where he's pretty creative. And then if the shots are there, take them and make them, but don't force them. He was 4 for 9 from 3 on Sunday. That ain't bad. That's 44%. No. That's pretty good. So hopefully he doesn't turn around in game 2 and go 1 for 9. But I think he's now self-aware to understand if they're going to give me the shot, I'll take it because I can still make it, but I'm not going to force it. We still got Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and these other players that are more natural scorers than I am. So I think that's why I changed my opinion on players, and a player who's self-aware is going to always help his team win, whether it be, of course, Larry Bird 40 years ago, Steph Curry now, and Marcus Smart, a big reason why the Celtics have been the best team in the Eastern Conference since the middle of January.
Yeah, and Sep, one last note about that is that if you just go and watch the video of them presenting Marcus Smart the award and Gary Payton giving him the award, and you can see how happy his teammates are for him. The chemistry on the Celtics has just done a complete 180 as well, Sap. I mean, they look like none of them wanted to be around each other for the first 3 months of the season. Like they were just like, okay, these are my coworkers. I'm going to punch the clock and then I'm going to go home and hang out with my family or my other friends and not even think about these guys. But now, I mean, they seem to be like a family unit. And again, I got to give credit to a guy that we gave a lot of criticism to early in the season, Ime Udoka. Like, he's developed a culture. He did it seemingly. He snapped his fingers midway through the season and was able to develop it. They seem to trust him. He trusts the players. He showed that was on example last night or the other night when he let them play out the last couple of seconds of the game without calling a timeout. He trusted that his players would make the right decision and win the game without him having to call a timeout. They did. They all seem to root for each other, campaign for each other to win awards on Twitter. And again, this was not the case from the first 3 months of the season, Sep, when they seemed like they couldn't stand each other.
And the same was last year too, right? They were a 500 team last year. They had problems in the bubble the year before. So this was a period where the Celtics just weren't getting the most out of their ability. And you're right, Jet. At some point in January, things just turned around. They became an elite defensive team, which, they can always be that because they have really good defensive pieces. And then their offense started to ramp it up because they became very unselfish, making that extra pass. And we saw that in the game-winning possession where, Brown normally would have forced that. If not, Smart would have forced it, but both gave the ball up to their best scorer, Jason Tatum, who hits a layup, which you generally don't see on a game-winning situation.
No, that was one of the coolest game winners I've ever seen. And I know I'm biased, Seth, but just because it happened with exactly 0 seconds left,
right.
When he drained it, the spin was just such a cool move to be able to do over Kyrie. It was
a Kobe type. It was a
very
Kobe
much
type.
So, yeah.
The catch was impressive, and then the spin and under control. I mean, we know Jason Tatum is an elite talent. And again, you can also look at Brooklyn and say, what the hell were they doing on defense?
Awful defensive position. Horrendous.
Which they don't like defense. Led by Kevin Durant, who was just kind of wandering out there. And again, Durant to me is the most unstoppable, most varied, versatile offensive player I've ever seen. I've said it a million times. It's become, kind of a pain in the butt for people listening that I say it all the time. But he's not the best player in the world because I will guarantee you that Giannis would have been somewhere to be found in that possession.
Oh, he would have stuffed that.
He would have been all over everyone. I mean, you remember the block he had last year. He was covering the entire Phoenix Suns team. He was out on Booker, and then he blocked an Ayton dunk all in one fell swoop. I kind of messed my words there. But that's why he's the best player in the world. And yeah, I mean, Kyrie's not exactly engaged defensively. And then, if you got Dragic out there, that's a negative defensive player. So yeah, that was just a fantastic finish. You don't generally see layups to win games, but good for the Celtics and an important win because, you want to keep that home court advantage. And especially the way this series is spread out, it takes forever to get to game 2. I mean, you play Sunday, Wednesday, then Saturday. So over you can at least have a 2-1 lead at that point because you don't want to get behind and have too much of 2-3 days in between these games and some negative press. But back to your point that it just seemed like the Celtics went from a team that didn't like each other, that wasn't totally engaged, to all of a sudden having great chemistry. I mean, we've seen some of this in sports in terms of teams getting it together midway through the season. Let's not forget the Atlanta Braves just won the World Series. They were below 500 going into August, and then they went 36-18 the final third of the season, and then just blew through the playoffs and won the World Series. I know you're not a hockey guy, neither am I.
It happens in baseball occasionally.
It can happen in baseball.
It doesn't really happen in basketball.
No. Again, I had to go back. I was going back to the 76-77 or the 77-78 Supersonics. That's how long back I had to go. They started the season 5-17 and then ended up getting hot and going to the finals and losing to Washington in the finals. That was in 78. The following year, they beat Washington in finals, back-to-back series between the Washington Bullets and the Supersonics. In hockey, this happens from time to time. The goalie gets hockey. Remember the St. Louis Blues beat the Bruins a couple of years ago in the Stanley Cup finals, and St. Louis was out of the playoffs, 2/3 of the way into the season. Then they just got hot and got right through the playoffs. But basketball generally is, you look at the first one. Oh, here's the strong teams.
It doesn't happen that often, but if it does happen, sometimes last year, Atlanta caught fire in the playoffs. Right. Like you can see, it happens in the playoffs, things click, but usually you don't have two divergent seasons within one season like the Celtics have had. The fact that they were the 2 seed and they won 50 games, they were 25-25 at one point, Sap, and they ended up winning 51 games. Like that doesn't really happen in basketball, with the exception of if somebody's returning from injury, a big player, or if you swing a big trade, neither of which happened for the Celtics. They just sort of found themselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So you're saying they win 26-6 over a period of time, or 33-10. We can. Yep. That's how well they played. And they went from the 11 seed, not even making the playoffs midway through the season, to becoming the 2 seed. And give them credit. They played the season out, ended up being the 2 seed, end up playing a really tough matchup in the first round, Brooklyn as opposed to Chicago. And, sometimes that can work. And I think it worked last year for Milwaukee. Remember people saying, the Bucks, who ended up being the 3 seed last year, should have avoided playing Miami in the first round. Right. Miami had swept them the year before. And Milwaukee was like, no, we have no problem with that. And then they went ahead and swept Miami. And then went from there to beat, obviously, Brooklyn in the second round, Atlanta in the conference final, and then Phoenix in the final. So sometimes just keep playing. You're going to face Brooklyn, at some point. And I think you could exercise a lot of demons by eliminating Brooklyn. And you could look at Brooklyn and say, okay, 3 years together of Kyrie and Durant, if you can knock them out of the playoffs this year, what exactly have they accomplished, Durant and Kyrie, in 3 years of Brooklyn? The first year, Durant didn't play because he was injured. The second year, they get second round, lose to Milwaukee in game 7, albeit a great series, but still lost in the second round. And if you can eliminate them in the first round, you kind of look and say, well, Brooklyn was supposed to build this really powerhouse team, and it hasn't worked out. That's how big this series is, Joe. This is one of the biggest first round series I can ever remember, because the talent level on both teams is so high. Brooklyn's not a 7 seed. We know that. We know how good the Celtics are. The similarities are to last year's first round series between Phoenix and the Lakers, also a 2-7. And we all thought the Lakers would win that series. And I still think if Anthony Davis doesn't get hurt in game 4, the Lakers would have won that series. But it's a similar matchup, right? Where the 7 seed has all the iconic talent and is expected to maybe beat the 2 seed. But if the 2 seed continues to play the way they can certainly push back and eliminate the more, not necessarily talented team, but the more known team with the likes of Durant, Kyrie Irving, and last year with the Lakers with LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many storylines with this series, Sap, and we talked about it a little bit when we were speculating that it would be the series last week before the Nets ultimately won their play-in against Cleveland and booked their ticket to facing the Celtics. Game 1 certainly lived up to those expectations of all the storylines and the matchups, and there's a lot of star power in this series. And like I said, Sap, the national viewing audience also felt the same way. As I'm looking at this through NBA Communications Twitter, put this out there that it was the most watched opening playoff weekend in more than a decade. This opening series the opening game between the Nets and the Celtics averaged 6.9 million viewers and peaked at 9.8 million viewers. It was the most watched first round game since 2016. And the NBA playoffs overall are way up in terms of viewership this year. But that game in particular, that also is the highest rated game all year long, regardless playoffs, regular season. So the fans, the casual fans feel it too. You could feel the tension and the energy from TD Garden watching the game. I mean, it was loud, it was raucous, and like every basket seemed to matter. There was very little separation from either of these teams for most of the game. The Celtics did at one point take a 15-point lead that they pissed away, but I think it was Kenny Smith maybe or somebody was saying it after the game that like a 15-point lead, if Brooklyn's looking at that, they feel like, okay, we can make that back in a minute. We'll just, couple threes here, we're right back in the game. It's nothing to them.
That's Tom Brady facing a 4 or 6 point deficit. I mean, seriously, It's like, I know people say, well, the Celtics blew the game and got lucky to win. I'm like, it's the NBA. If you watched it before, especially now with the 3-point shot being so prevalent, and you've got two ridiculous all-time great players in Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving on the other side, Kyrie Irving was magical in the fourth quarter. He was pretty damn good the entire game. Scored 18 points in the fourth quarter. Durant was off Sunday. That's why it was important to win that game, because he was off. I don't expect him to have too many games like that when he's 9 for 24 from the floor. He just didn't seem engaged. Even on the defensive end, he was kind of in and out at some point. So you had to take advantage of that and get that first game under your belt. And now you set it up for game two, which again, you want to kind of secure a home court advantage there and put pressure on Brooklyn going back to Brooklyn, where Brooklyn doesn't have a huge home court advantage. I think the Celtics have a sizable home court advantage at TD Garden. The crowd's crazy.
Especially in this series where they hate Brooklyn.
Well,
I think if anything, Brooklyn fans are ambivalent about the Celtics.
Yeah. Do you get the sense, now you're the Celtics guy and I'm the LeBron guy, but do you get the sense that Celtic fans despise this Brooklyn team more than LeBron with the Cavaliers and LeBron with Miami?
They despise Kyrie more than they despise LeBron at that point.
Yeah. And I also think at some point, you also think that they just
slightly
said
different.
Not going to lose. I mean, because LeBron is obviously a better player than Kyrie Irving, and that you felt at some point, it got by 2011, it became pretty evident that LeBron wasn't going to lose to you at any point going forward, whereas you could still beat Kyrie and Durant. And by the way, let me just push back again against Kevin Durant. As great as he is, and I think he's a top 15, top 20 player in the history of the sport. I've never seen anybody who could score more ways than Kevin Durant. He makes it look so damn effortless. But if he gets knocked out in the first round this year, other than his 3 years at Golden State, where he was, running alongside Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala, all these great players, he'd have gone to one finals. So, can we stop saying he's the greatest player in the world and he's better than LeBron and he's better than this guy and better than that guy? Again, he's phenomenal. He's phenomenal. Top 15, top 20 player of all time. But let's just pump the brakes on he's the greatest player in the world. If he gets knocked out in the first round, what's he done outside of his 3 years in Golden State? Look, in Golden State, he accomplished a lot, but he was in a pretty good situation. We can say that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And that's all part of the narrative here. And that's why it's such a massive first round series, because both these teams have legitimate title aspirations this season. Yes. And one of them is not going to make it out of the first round. That's a humongous letdown for either fan base and for either franchise and the players. When you have title aspirations and you fall that short of it, that's a huge reality check. And that is why a lot of teams at the top of the East avoided Brooklyn purposely, because they didn't want to, potentially lose in the first round. I think it was just that winning that first game for the Celtics was so important for a bunch of reasons, Sap. I think because it's a team that is your biggest rival right now in terms of how the fan base perceives it, it was big to get that win, but also because it's the same team that crushed you in the playoffs last year in the first round. It wasn't a competitive series. It was a gentleman's sweep. And the fact that the way the game was going, in that it was going to be Kyrie that came into Boston and flipped the finger, and we're going to talk about that in a second, and was going to be the guy that almost single-handedly beat you. That would have been a really tough pill to swallow, for it to be Kyrie Irving show and he beat you in game one on your home court when you're the 2 seed, they're the 7 seed. That would have been a really tough narrative. And I think it would have shook a lot of fans' confidence in the series, and certainly the Celtics' own confidence. And it swung in the last second. And so a massive boost to the Celtics' confidence, I think, to be able to win that game and withstand the Kyrie Irving great game, and winning on, like we said earlier, Sap, such a microcosm of what has been working well for this team the second half of the year. I think they have a lot of confidence in themselves. But yeah, this is just a critical first round series for both these franchises. And if you're the Celtics and you lose the series, you go, wow, we were the 2 seed. We still can't get over the hump against this team. Do we have to re-examine what our roster looks like? And the Nets, same exact question. Man, we have, 2 superstar players. We couldn't get out of the first round. We know we were playing, we didn't help ourselves with our seeding because we were injured a lot this season, but still we crushed this team last year. They don't look all that different in terms of personnel. So what happened? What's the difference? I think that I can't remember a first round series that had 1, this many storylines, and 2, this many implications for what the end of what the final result will be.
Yeah. And then the winner gets to play Giannis and the Bucks.
Yeah.
There's your reward.
Right.
And then if you beat them, you probably play either Miami or Philadelphia.
We're both rolling. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've got 5 legitimate title contenders in the Eastern Conference. You really only have, I think, 2 in the West with Phoenix and Golden State. So the East is stronger. And, it's less than a decade since Danny Ainge fleeced the Brooklyn Nets, getting all those draft picks for Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry, and use those picks to get Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So you would think, okay, here we are a decade later, the Celtics should be in great shape as a title contender, and Brooklyn wasted. Well, Brooklyn was able to go out and get Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and that made them relevant. Then they traded for Harden and moved Harden for Simmons, and Simmons hasn't played, and maybe he will play in this series. Who the hell knows about him? But yeah, it is a fascinating series. You got the Boston, New York dynamic, right? And then Kyrie is in the middle of all of this. I put a poll out at John Sapp 25, who's the biggest sports villain in Boston sports history. And I try to keep it somewhat relevant, in terms of time. So I put Kyrie, Peyton Manning, Alex Rodriguez. I put Ulf Samuelsson as the hockey player because he essentially ended Cam Neely's career. And I think to be a villain, you also have to be like a great player to like have an impact on the game. And you actually had a great response. And a lot of people did too. Bill Laimbeer, who, villain personified, Jet, because he just had a scowl. He was very comfortable, leveling players. He would take Larry Bird down by his neck. He was just a dirty, angry player, but he also was a winner. So that was a good choice as well. But Kyrie's a villain in a different type of way. He's kind of beating you with his extreme talent. But yeah, this series is just fascinating. For a first round series, the NBA is very lucky because normally first round series are just snoozers, right? They go 4 or 5 games, no big implications. This thing is huge.
Well, and that's what so far, what's happened in the other Eastern Conference series, Sap. Philadelphia has waxed Toronto twice, and now Toronto's missing a bunch of key players.
Yeah.
Miami obliterated Atlanta in their first game. Trae Young was terrible, which is very unexpected because he's been fantastic in the playoffs in his career. And Milwaukee has taken care of business against Chicago. So this was really the only super competitive game, and I think people have predicted this would be the most competitive series. But yeah, we've seen a lot of this so far in the postseason, and this happens in the first round, Sap, where sometimes it's not all that competitive. Last night we saw Golden State blow out Denver for the second time in 2 games. Phoenix blew out New Orleans, which is what a 1-8 should be, and but the other 2-7 series in the West looks like it's going to be a fascinating one too, with Minnesota and Memphis. So maybe 2-7 is going to be the new exciting series. How in the NCAA tournament, sometimes it's like the weird seedings that become the best games, not necessarily the closest seedings. So this year we got some interesting 2-7 series, but yeah, I think especially in the East, Sap, next round is really going to be like where the metal is tested for all these teams, because essentially Miami, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee have all been given layups in their first round, and Boston and Brooklyn is really being tested. That's going to be a
dog fight. Yeah, that's going to go minimum 6, right? I can't see that thing ending in 5. Trae Young is so good and so great in the postseason. I wouldn't quite put Miami to the second round just yet, although I think they will because they play such good defense that it's going to be tough on Trae to carry that team.
Well, and I guess Duncan Robinson's not going to go 8 of 9 from 3 every game. You know,
right.
That's tough to overcome.
Yeah, he is pretty good. If he doesn't, Tyler Hero can go 8 for 9 the next night. But I also think that when you look at Philadelphia, I thought Toronto would have a chance, but now you got Scotty Barnes out, who I think could be Rookie of the Year. I thought Philly could be in some sort of trouble because Matisse Thybulle can't play in Toronto because he's not vaccinated. But Embiid's impossible to deal with, and Harden's just facilitating, and Tyrese Maxey is playing like an all-star. I mean, we're both big fans. So, yeah, I think, look, the second round in the East is going to be, we presume, Miami, Philadelphia. It should be an outstanding series. And then you've got, hopefully, I mean, I'm rooting for the Celtics, Jet, believe it or not.
There you go.
You know,
good man.
Anyway to push back against Durant and Kyrie, because
that's true. It helps your narrative. It's not, you're not being altruistic here. You're not doing something for me. It's for LeBron.
No. Let the Phoenix Suns win the NBA title for all I care. That'd be Chris Paul's first. He's not getting in the way of LeBron James. But yeah, and then you got, Celtics against Milwaukee. I mean, man. Those feel like finals, not second round series. So a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've gotten some outstanding games. We've gotten some blowouts, as you would expect. Not everything can be ultra competitive. But for the most part, I think that Celtics game lived up to the hype. And like I said, so many people watched it, and everybody who watched it was paid off because it was just an incredibly competitive game. These teams do not like each other. Certainly the Celtics fans don't like the Nets. The Celtics seem to have taken more of an aggressive stance than they did last year when they got waxed by Brooklyn, and are not, if you notice, are not as buddy with Kyrie as they were in, past games. The series last year, they played to the refs' credit. They let them play very physical in that game one. And I think that's how the Celtics prefer to play it anyways. And so it would be awful if the Celtics lost to the Nets. It would take me a while to recover from that, but to beat them, man, would that feel good, Sap. I can't remember a playoff series where that would feel better.
That's the danger, though, right? Because this series is going to go 6 or 7. It's going to be emotional and physical.
Yes.
And again, you expect Giannis and the Bucks to win in 4, maybe 5 games over Chicago.
Yeah, I think 4. I don't think Chicago has anything left.
So now you got Giannis a little rested. They're the defending champs. He's the best player in the league, and that now your reward for beating Brooklyn is to play the defending champions. It's not exactly a great reward, but that will make it that much more difficult. Look, the Celtics, if they win the title this year, are going to have to beat Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Miami or Philly, and then Phoenix or Golden State. I mean, there's no layups. It like from round 1 on. Normally,
that's a really hard path. Really hard.
Yeah,
and it's gonna, whoever comes out of the East is gonna have to beat at least two really, really good teams. The Celtics or the Nets are gonna have to beat 3. That's just the way the seeding ended up.
A team like Phoenix, should have a layup in round 1. And then, if Luka's not healthy or playing, and Utah tends to never get past the second round anyway, you can almost put Phoenix in the conference finals, and maybe Golden State has a tough matchup against Memphis, and they take a lot out of each other. I mean, Phoenix has the path, and you know what? They deserve it. They had the best record this year. There should be some sort of reward for that you go 64-18 and play your ass off the entire season, that you get rewarded that. And again, the West isn't quite as good as the East because the 7 and 8 seeds, although Minnesota's a pretty darn good team and they could beat Memphis, but
the 8 seed's crap. The Pelicans suck.
Yeah, the Pelicans. I mean, if Zion had been there and healthy, then maybe that's a different. But they're not the 8 seed then at that point. But yeah, so I mean, the thing is opened up for Phoenix. That's why I picked Phoenix to win it. I think that you could see a team lose in the finals one year and come back the next year and win it. We've seen San Antonio do it. We've seen Detroit do it. There's teams have done that. So I think that Phoenix could do that again. But this Eastern Conference is special in this series. This feels like an NBA Finals because of the hatred. And I think you bring up a great point, Jet, in that the Celtics may not be quite as buddy-buddy with the Nets, especially with Kyrie. And we always look at Jason Tatum, idolizing Kyrie and looking at Kevin Durant as his big brother. They're an Olympic team together. And, Tatum is a reasonable facsimile of Durant. And I think Ime Udoka early in the season said, these guys aren't your big brothers. They're your competitors. And I think that Ime Udoka's really set the tone with that. Well, let's not forget, Ime was an assistant coach last year in Brooklyn. So he has some internal knowledge of the Nets. And maybe he's got that message to the likes of Tatum and Brown. Like, if you guys want to be as great as you can be, you have to dislike the other team. You don't have to necessarily hate them and want to punch them in the midsection, but you want to compete and beat those guys. And maybe that message has gotten through to Tatum and Brown and Smart and the rest of the players.
Yeah, and I think so too. I think you're totally right on that, Sap. And I think there's also the degree with Tatum where, I think he idolized those guys too, older than him. I think he's modeled some of his game after Kevin Durant. We know he's modeled most of his game after Kobe, but there are similarities between his game and Kevin Durant's game, certainly. And I think, he looked up to them and said, well, wow, I'm playing on the Olympic team with this guy. And now Kyrie, was a guy I looked up to when he was at Duke. And then I followed him and went to Duke and stuff. But now he looks at it and goes, I'm just as good as these guys. I've made the All-Star game multiple times. I'm going to be all NBA this year. And I think that once you get that, establish yourself as a veteran in the NBA and start getting accolades, then you could maybe say, well, why am I, giving props to these guys? Like, they should give due deference to me. Sure. This is 2 games in a row now when they play the Nets. Tatum's outplayed Kevin Durant. I'm not saying he's better than Kevin Durant, but he can on any given night outplay Kevin Durant. Jason Tatum on any given night can be the best player on the court. He's that good. I'm not saying he's going to consistently, he'll every night be the best player in the court. He's not there yet. He could get there, but I think he probably feels differently about himself than a couple of years ago when he looked at the other team and said, oh, wow, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, 2 of my favorite, basketball players. And now he said, oh, these are 2 guys that I go to the All-Star game with every year, and I go to the Olympics with, and I am every bit as good as them. And on a given night, I can be the best player of those 3 guys on the court. So I think that helps change the perception too. And I think that this year, especially coming into the playoffs versus last year where they came into the playoffs and thought, oh, okay, let's just get this over with. We can get our summer vacation soon, 1, 2, 3 Cancun. This year they're coming into it. We've played the best basketball the past 3 months in the NBA. We think we can win a championship. We're not going to be, show any sort of weakness to this Nets team. Our goal is to go out and beat them and try to win a championship, not go out, punch the clock, and then go home, to vacation. They don't want to go home. They don't feel like they deserve it, and they feel like they should be competing for a championship. So I think the mentality is totally different versus you're playing the exact same opponent as last year, but the mentality is totally different.
And let's not forget, you have Jaylen Brown this year, which you did last year. So that's a big addition. And you also have Al Horford, outstanding on Sunday with 20 points.
I thought he was your best player. I thought he was their best player.
He really was. I mean, he came up with some big plays on the defensive end of the court. Obviously, hit some big baskets early. When you were struggling, he kind of kept you in the game in the early going. So that was a big thing. So
if the Nets are going to go small, Sap, which they typically do, you have to dominate the boards, and Horford had 15 rebounds.
Right. Yeah, that's where I think that they do have an advantage. And now we just have to watch. I don't think Rob Williams is going to come back for this series, but maybe it's likely or more likely than Rob Williams coming back that Ben Simmons gets involved. Who the hell knows with him? I guess he's been cleared for 4-on-4 contact.
Yeah, I think safe to assume neither plays. That seems to be the best bet.
Yes. Yeah.
But both teams, it does them no disservice to say, hey, this guy's getting close to coming back,
Sure.
They're putting it out there. So they're going to put it out there. But yeah, I think it's unlikely. And I think that what you saw in game 1 is what you can expect from the rest of the series. And, the last thing we'll say on it, Sap, is that, there's the Kyrie factor, obviously. And he was fined $50,000 today because he flipped off the fans a grand total of 3 times, if you count each finger. And I said this on Twitter, and I'm curious if you agree with me, Sap. I know the NBA has a policy and they're going to fine him. There was no world in which they weren't. I don't think they should, just as I don't think fans should be kicked out for, booing somebody, yelling at them, FUing them. As long as they're not crossing a line and saying something personal or homophobic or racist, then absolutely kick them out, ban them. But if they're just, giving a guy a hard time and saying, oh, F you, Kyrie, you suck, whatever, and Kyrie flips in the bird, I think the fans are in their right to do that. Kyrie's well in his right to go back at them and flip him the bird. I think that's great for the sport, honestly. And I know the NBA wants to have a family-friendly product, but I think it's awesome for the sport. It's an awesome storyline. I think Kyrie embracing being a villain is great for him and great for the league and great for this series. And I think the Celtics fans should continue to get on him because they have. And I saw your guy Nick Wright said this and called Celtics fans meatheads for booing him. I think Nick Wright's a moron, but the Celtics fans have very legitimate grievances to boo the guy. It's not a racial thing with Kyrie. They have legitimate reasons to not like him. And it's because of how he left, why he left, the fact that he quit in the last series he played with them. I think there's a strong element of booing him because of the anti-vax stuff too, Sap. I think they have legitimate reasons to boo him, and I have no problem with him flipping off the fans.
Well, that's why when I put that poll out, I said Kyrie could fit the bill as the biggest villain in Boston sports history. Although I'm just trying to keep it relevant. I mean, we go back to to me like Jack Tatum, who crippled Darryl.
I said that too. Yeah,
78. I mean, but
a lot more serious than the Kyrie stuff.
Way more serious. Yeah, I mean, and Ulf Samuelson essentially ending Cam Neely's career and Matt Cook essentially ending Mark Savard's career. I mean, those are despicable acts. And Lambeer was, a guy who could be dangerous out there, although it was Robert Parrish who punched him, not the other way around. But with Kyrie, it's because he played here, right? I mean, Peyton Manning didn't play here. Alex Rodriguez almost played here, right? I mean, it looked like the
and that's where I think a lot of the anger stemmed from,
right?
That he almost came here, though that wasn't his fault.
No, it was more the Players Association didn't want him to take a, salary cut and, make it work. With Peyton Manning, I think what happened with Peyton Manning is, let's not forget, he beat you 3 out of 4 times in the AFC championship game. I know people don't realize that, but he was 3-1 in the AFC championship games against Tom Brady, believe it or not. But I think once people got to maybe know, not that they were going to meet him, but got to hear from Peyton Manning, you kind of liked him. Right. I mean, he had the Manning face where if things went poorly, he kind of had this look on his face. But I think he kind of liked Peyton Manning. Right? He's a likable guy. I mean, I was just listening to Ted Johnson on the Sports Hub today, and he's like, I hated Peyton Manning playing against him until I met him afterwards, and he just won me over. He's a good guy. He's fun. So with Kyrie, he's a little bit full of himself. With he's got an opinion on everything, which is great. I like when athletes have opinions, but he seems to want to be a know-it-all. And then he was here, and then he said he was going to stay here, and then he wasn't. And, like you said, he quit against the Bucks in that series. And so, yeah, I mean, he's a guy who's going to burn a lot of bridges. He did in Cleveland. Yep. He probably will in Brooklyn at some point, right? I mean, most likely. I think James Harden wanted out of there. Yeah.
He hasn't yet. I mean, he's done everything to burn bridges there, but.
Right. And maybe James Harden, I think at some point says, I got to get away from this guy. It's not going to work. And maybe he's just very fortunate that Kevin Durant's there, who is maybe his best friend and just believes in Kyrie.
Loves him. Yep.
And a lot of players in the league love him. I mean, I think they love the skill set because I've said this. I mean, who's more skilled than Kyrie Irving? It's
I was talking to my sister about it the other night, and I said, I've been watching basketball for 30 years.
Yep.
He's top maybe 5, certainly top 10 in terms of the most skilled player that I've ever seen in terms of skill. Oh yeah, no, it's remarkable. It's remarkable. You saw it on Sunday. It's insane.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
But I hate all the people who say he should be on the top 75. It's not the top 75 most skilled players of all time. No. It's top 75 best players. He's crashed and burned 2 franchises. He's working on his 3rd. He hasn't won anything individually. So no, not top 75 player all time. Top 75 talent. Yeah, no doubt. But that's not the same thing.
Yeah, I don't even think he's received an MVP vote in his entire career. I think he made 3rd team All-NBA once or twice. Hit a huge shot in the finals, obviously, with Cleveland against Golden State. I mean, he was huge in that series, but then the next year he quit on them.
Yeah, so, and he's playing again. Like he was remarkable in that series, and that shot was there. But like again, his biggest the most success he's had on a team was playing with, at the time, the best player in the league, and you could make a case the best player of all time at the absolute height of his powers.
Yeah, LeBron, he was right in his prime.
On that, yeah. So
and now he's playing with the guy who, at worst, is the 2nd or 3rd best player in the sport, and Kevin Durant. Right? I mean, he's played with some pretty good guys, and when he was here, the Celtics were pretty loaded. They didn't have LeBron or Kevin Durant. We get that, but they had a pretty good roster here. Yeah, so I mean, he's fascinating to watch. You're right. I mean, when we talk skill, we talk about like Luka Doncic to me is as skilled as anybody in the league right now. I think Luka Doncic is more skilled than Giannis, but Giannis is a better player. I mean, I think certain quarterbacks are probably
it's not
more
the same
skilled.
thing.
It's different. I think Aaron Rodgers is more skilled than Tom Brady, but Tom Brady's a better quarterback. Both of those things can be true. The same thing here. Kyrie Irving is ridiculous. I mean, his handle is the best I've ever seen. He's a tremendous passer. He can finish at the basket with either hand better than any guy who's 6'2". His mid-range game is lethal. He just looks like he's in no rush out there. He's in complete control of the situation. His IQ is off the charts. Yeah, I mean, he's so much fun to watch, but then you look and say, well, and again, I enjoy watching because I'm not a hardened Celtics fan like you who feels scorned by the way he acted here for 2 years. But no, to watch the guy play is magnificent. He's phenomenal. But I think he kind of fits into that villain template because, again, the way it ended here and the way he's kind of carried on. It's not like he comes in here and kind of forgets about it. He's giving the middle finger to the fans. He's swearing at the fans. He swears after the game in his press conferences, all while he's observing Ramadan. I thought he was supposed to be at peace with himself. Well, apparently not.
Yeah, prior to series, he said, it is what it is. I'm comfortable playing there. It's not a distraction, whatever. And he's flipping out the fans. He's not a genuine person. That's the problem I have with him too. He's just not a genuine person at all. But he thinks he's, the smartest guy in the league. I don't remember an athlete that I've disliked more, and the anti-vax stuff just put it, way over the top, for me. But again, Sep, I have no problem with him flipping off the fans. If they're giving it to him, he said, match their energy. That's fine. I have absolutely zero problem with it. I'm not clutching my pearls that he, flipped off the fans, or he did the double middle finger, behind his head and was doing the sobbing thing. I think it's great for the sport. Honestly, it's awesome. And I get why the league fined him, whatever, but if I'm going to keep that same standard where I feel like the fans should be able to harass him in terms of like, trying to rattle him, not crossing the line, but trying to rattle him, then he should be able to go back at them. No problem. I think it's great. But it's we'll have to see what happens in game 2. The fans are going to be even louder because now they know that they've gotten under his skin a little bit, even though he played fantastic. And we'll see if he reacts again. But yeah, it's just he's not a likable guy, Sap. So that just adds the other wrinkle to why you want to really win that series if you're the Celtics, because you don't want to see this guy advance, certainly. So we'll have to see. But it should be awesome, Sap. And game 2 is tomorrow. Do you want to do quick predictions for the rest of this round before we wrap up here?
Yeah, sure. Yep. In terms of this round, absolutely. Fire away.
Okay, Sap. So I'll just start in the Western Conference. Phoenix is up 1-0 over New Orleans. How do you see that one playing out?
4 or 5. I mean, I don't think it'll be much of a sweat for Phoenix.
Don't sit on the fence. Pick it. 4 or 5.
I'll go 5. I think New Orleans will come back one sort of win with Brandon Ingram having a big game and CJ McCollum. And yeah, I'll go 5 games.
Okay. I'm going to say Phoenix will sweep them. Dallas, Utah is tied at 1 game apiece. Luka Doncic may come back for game 3. It seems unsure, but it seems like it's trending in that direction. How do you see that one?
I'm going to go Dallas in 6. Originally, I picked Utah because I didn't think Doncic would play. If he plays, even on one leg, he'll be the best player out on the court. So I'll go with Dallas in 6.
The fact that Utah lost to a Luka-less Dallas team is pathetic. They should have taken those 2. What an advantage. I mean, credit to Jaylen Brunson, who was fantastic. I think he had 41 points the other night and, carried the Mavericks. But, I mean, no excuse for Utah to drop a game to a team without their best player. And he's their best player by a wide margin. So I don't know how you could pick Utah in this series. Yeah, I'll say Dallas in 6 as well, Sap. Golden State is up 2-0 on Denver and has 2 consecutive blowouts.
Yeah, I'll go Golden State in 5. I'll give Denver 1 win. Jokic is quite capable of putting up 35, 17, and 11 and willing his team to victory. But Golden State is so deep, so versatile, so talented, well coached, and you got Steph back kind of running the control. So I'll go with Golden State in 5.
I agree with you there. Golden State in 5. I think Denver can take a game at home, but it's certainly not looking that way. And Golden State looks very, very dangerous. Last game or last series in the Western Conference, the 2-7 Memphis is down 1-0 against Minnesota. Game 2 is tonight. Does Memphis even it up? And how does the series go?
I think Memphis wins in 7. This has the feeling of a really interesting series that maybe not everybody's going to be paying attention to because all the eyes will be on the Celtics and Brooklyn. And again, they're playing on different nights, so you can observe both series. But this feels like a 7-game series. I think Minnesota's high-end talent may be better than Memphis, right? I mean, because you got Karl-Anthony Towns. Anthony Edwards is just a burgeoning star. D'Angelo Russell's outstanding. I mean, you got John Morant, obviously, with Memphis, and then a lot of really excellent players there. I'll go Memphis in 7. It feels like it's going to go to Game 7 in Memphis and just go right down to the last minute. But I'll go with Memphis in 7.
Yeah, fun series. I'm going to say Minnesota in 6. I do think that they're coming together and playing their best basketball of the season right now. God help me, Sap. I love Patrick Beverly. Yeah, I love him. He's such a douche, but it's awesome. The stuff after sending the Clippers home was fantastic. And he got fined for 2 consecutive games for, I believe the NBA called it excessive foul language. He's awesome. Right. He's just such an a-hole. And really takes everything so personally. But if you look at his basketball journey, you get it. Like he played 3 years in like China or like, I don't know where the hell he was playing, Ukraine, and made it to the NBA. And then the Clippers decided to part ways with it. I love him. I know he's done some questionable things and can play a little dirty sometimes, but I love him. And I think was the perfect piece for this Memphis team because they needed an edge. And I think he's given it to them. So I'll take Minnesota in 6. Based off of what you said, I think their top end talent is better. And in the playoffs, sometimes that comes to fruition. So let's move to the Eastern Conference, Sap. Miami is up 1-0 against Atlanta. Their second game is tonight. Miami just crushed them in game 1. How do you see the rest of the series playing out?
I'll go Miami in 5 because Trae Young is so good. He'll have a couple of games that will keep them close. Maybe one game where he wins the game for them. But Miami is so well constructed. Play excellent defense, great ball movement. Spoelstra, maybe the best coach in the sport. I wouldn't push back against that feeling, but I'll go with Miami in 5.
I'll say Miami in 5 too, though I wouldn't be shocked if they swept them. Not having Clint Capella is a big deal for Atlanta, and John Collins is hobbled. So it's not like Atlanta is at their full strength like they were last postseason. And Miami looks like, they're just a team on an absolute mission. So I think Miami in 5, but I wouldn't be shocked if they were able to sweep Atlanta. Next series, Philadelphia is already up 2-0 over Toronto. Now the series goes to Canada. So Thibault cannot play in those 2 games. But Toronto, as we mentioned earlier in the show, Sap, is playing, with not a loaded deck. Scotty Barnes is out. They have injury stuff going on. How do you see this one finishing up?
I'll say 5 games. I'll give Toronto 1 win at home. Again, good culture with the Raptors, well coached, all of that. But Embiid's an impossible matchup for them, and pretty much any team in the league. So I'll go Philadelphia in 5.
I'll say Philadelphia sweep them. I think that Toronto, the fact that they lost both those games, and I think in such decisive fashion, I think took a lot of wind out of Toronto's sails. And I don't think if it was 1-1 and they were heading to Toronto and there was no Thibault, I think Toronto would feel really, really good and Philadelphia would be nervous. But I think Philadelphia is playing with such confidence right now and feels like, this team isn't even nearly on the same level as us. And the fact that people picked them to win this series, they took that as a personal slight. So I think they'll end up sweeping them. But we shall see. Game 2 between Milwaukee and Chicago is tomorrow. Milwaukee's up 1-0 over the Bulls. How do you see this playing out?
This should be a sweep. I mean, it almost feels like there's no home court advantage for the Bulls. And look, they've got a great fan base, but there's no travel in this series because, Milwaukee sometimes feels like a suburb of Chicago. It's only 90 miles away. I think Milwaukee will win this in 4. They didn't even play well in game 1. They were able to win. And look, my feelings on Giannis. I think he's just so focused and playing at such a high level. I'll go for a sweep in this series.
I have it as a sweep too, Sap. I think that besides the 1-8, Phoenix Pelicans matchup. This one's the most lopsided matchup in terms of how I view the two teams.
True.
I picked Milwaukee to come out of the East. And so I think that it's just too much for Chicago to handle, especially without Lonzo Ball, and they have not been playing good basketball recently. And to their credit, they competed in game one, but I think just Milwaukee's too much. The experience versus, Chicago is, these guys have very little to no playoff experience. So I think Milwaukee will end up sweeping them. And that brings us to the last series and the one that we talked about most of the show. Boston, Brooklyn. Game 2 is on Wednesday. Boston, as we know, up 1-0. We've already said 6 or 7, but make a definitive prediction who wins the series in 6 or 7.
Celtics in 6. I think it would be dangerous to get to game 7 only because you got Durant and Kyrie out there, and those guys are all capable of going for 45 and efficiently. And of course, you have Jason Tatum, who's quite capable of that. But I'm going to go Celtics in 6. I think they play better defense. I think in the end they move the ball better. It's almost like Brooklyn isn't even coached. It's like we've got Durant, we've got Kyrie, we'll figure it out. So in these types of series, I know the best player generally wins, and that is Kevin Durant. But there also has to be some changes and adjustments, and I think the Celtics are much more capable of dealing with that. So I'm going to go Celtics in 6.
Yeah, my dad asked me before the game tipped off, what do you think is more like? I'll pose the same question to you, Sap. What's more likely, in your opinion, that the Celtics figure out the Nets in this series, or the Nets figure out the Celtics?
I think the Celtics figure out the Nets, and I think Ime Udoka is a big reason for that. And again, we sometimes, don't give enough credit to coaches in the NBA, but he did coach 1 year in Brooklyn, so I think he knows a little bit about those guys. Steve Nash is just a cheerleader. I mean,
total rah. That's it. That's all he does.
I mean, Kyrie said last year, we don't really need a coach. And I think that Kevin Durant kind of followed through on that for the most part. So, yeah, I think the Celtics can adapt a little bit more. And they're just a better defensive team. And that can certainly swing a series. And again, Durant and Kyrie are quite capable of just being unstoppable. We know that. But I think the Celtics will at least try to adjust. And I think they did in game 1, try to be physical with Durant. Look, he's unstoppable. But if you can just get him a little bit off rhythm, maybe he has another inefficient game and you're able to keep winning.
Yeah, and I think that you hope that you make a few more layups. The Celtics missed a bunch of easy ones at the rim. So you hope that happens. You hope that Goran Dragic and Seth Curry don't have as big of an impact as they did in game 1, and that even if Durant plays better, that you can survive based off of those other things happening. So I have Celtics in 7. I anticipate all these games to be really, really intense. So hopefully the Celtics prove us right, Sap, because it would help your narrative with LeBron, and it would help me feel really good about hating Kyrie Irving in the Nets. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, as always presented by Full Press Coverage. We will be here all playoffs long, and we will be back later this week with a new show, because every single day in the playoffs brings us something new to talk about, and this should be a blast, especially as we continue along in some of these really awesome series like Minnesota, Memphis, Boston, and Brooklyn. And when we get to the next round in the Eastern Conference, as we alluded to, Sap, it's going to be, it should just be an absolute war in all those series. So a lot of stuff to talk about.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
All right. So make sure you find the show wherever podcasts are found. Just type in the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. You can find the YouTube version, youtube.com/JetStryer. Make sure you check out our social medias at JetStryer and at JohnSap25. Sap with that awesome, really fun poll question about the biggest sports villains in Boston history on his Twitter. He always has great poll questions. Sometimes I help create the great poll questions, but usually it's him. So go check that out. And we will be back later this week talking more NBA playoffs. See you, everybody.